Hi there, it's Charlie Mann with Great Legal Marketing, and I have a really awesome guest with me for this video to talk about mental toughness. His name is Jay Henderson. He is the owner of Real Talent Hiring, and he is an executive coach and a true expert on the topic of hiring and on the concept of mental toughness. I've known Jay for a long time, and I'm so happy he's going to be talking with us about this subject because it is more important than ever. So Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you because right now, people need to get back a sense of control more than ever. So from a mindset standpoint, from a controlling your environment standpoint, what are you telling people in this current coronavirus era to do and long into the future, because really we should continue practicing these habits to take back control in their lives?
It's a great question. Because that is the issue. Control is really the issue. You mentioned mental toughness, and mental toughness is actually emotional control. And so what's happening right now is got people very, very fearful, and basically the human mind moves toward a negativity bias. We were talking a little bit previous to the call. There's a little bit of a negativity bias that goes on because the brain has this part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is designed to help us to be safe, to be careful, to avoid, be aware of threats in our environment, and to make us aware. It's like an executive secretary that is constantly filtering everything that's going on around us to make sure that we're, again, safe. And that's the job of the subconscious mind, actually. The subconscious mind takes in, they say, 11 million word bits per second.
Wow.
And the conscious mind can handle 8 word bits per second.
That's a lot of information for someone to be taking in. And I imagine right now, that's got to be just absolutely nonstop, maybe even double that, because we're all feeding into the existing news cycle about the virus. And I think that's kind of a habit a lot of people take, is whenever there's a big news story coming in, they just are constantly consuming that information. So what can someone do when they feel like they're being bombarded to resuscitate that feeling of control?
Well, you got to protect what is coming in and what's coming at you. I mean, we all know that part of mental toughness is focus. And focus isn't just concentration. Focus is also what you say no to. And so you've got to determine, this is why, so if there's a negativity bias, there's 2 things that the brain does. The brain seeks out, protecting yourself to be safe. And then it lets in goals. That's pretty much the only 2 things at a high level that are happening. So if you don't have clear goals, if you're not focused on the future in a positive way, see, fear is looking into the future and seeing a negative result. And you used the word environment a lot earlier in the call. And it's kind of like we've hit this environment where there's all of a sudden this vulnerability because we don't really know what's going to happen, right? So everyone's kind of in this little bit of a protection, fearful, consciously protective and fearful mode. And that's what I call negative goal setting. Right? Because we're constantly checking the news. Where are we? What's going on? I mean, I do it all the time myself, right? How many cases are, of this virus are up the street from me and all this thing, So we've been staying home and practicing social distancing. I'm in my office now, but there's nobody here, But it's a real dynamic of controlling the focus and putting it on what you want it to be on. And it's not just glib goal setting. It's actually, what do you want to be paying attention to? Nobody's saying don't be paying attention to what's really happening around you. That would be ridiculous. But there is a really critical function right now, is to keep control by determining what you want to have happen. So you've got to continue, even though things are hard, even though things can be difficult, even though people are losing revenue. I mean, there's a lot of very, very tough, challenging things that are happening for people in their businesses. And even though all that is happening, we've kind of got to be aware of the impact of our minds on ourselves and not let our emotions get away from us. and be aware that, yes, there's a reality to what is going on right now. But control, like you mentioned in that question, is really the word. We can only control what we can control. In fact, we were talking before we started recording, as you recall, and we talked a little bit about the 7 habits of highly effective people. And one of the powerful things that Stephen taught many years ago in that material is that there's a circle of concern and there's a circle of influence. And briefly, the circle of concern are all the things that are in our lives that affect us, that concern us, but we have no control over. Where the circle of influence are all the things that we can influence, right? And he talked about how that, so these are 2 concentric circles, yeah? And basically, if you focus on the circle of concern, things we cannot control, he would show the inner circle of influence would shrink. So you have less and less control over your life. The more you focus on the things that you cannot control, which is pretty obvious, but it was neat to see in this language and in these 2 concentric circles. Whereas if you put your attention on what you can influence and what you can control, then that expands until it fills up the circle of concern, until it overshadows even almost the circle of concern. And we all know that that's really what we're about. Stephen actually just popped into my head, talked about another thing called the 4 human endowments, and I'm going to forget them, but there was conscience, imagination, independent will, and another one. And the idea of those things is that those are the things in humans that cause us to be higher than the animal plane, if you will, right? And give us the ability to actually take control of our focus and our minds and not get out of control emotionally, even though there's realities, right? But we're using conscience, our independent will, our agency, our ability to determine, to choose what we think about. And that's really what is at the essence of mental toughness. There's mental toughness, which is controlling our thinking, choosing what it is we're going to think about. And that's all well and good when the sun is shining and it's easy. But when you're attacked by a bear, that kind of stuff goes out the window.
Yes.
So that's where the mental toughness training over time, preparation and planning and things like that come into play.
Yeah. So the best time to have been doing all this, of course, was yesterday.
Right.
But for those folks who are now trying to deal with it today, someone who feels, that anxiety that stems from going into that fight or flight mode, if someone feels like they've been existing, especially a business owner or a law firm owner specifically, is there any practical thing someone can do to at least tamp it down or maybe even press the reset into a neutral state?
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned earlier the word your environment. So I think about, people have more time on their hands maybe today. So I don't recommend watching the news necessarily. Think controlling your environment, news, Facebook feeds or what have you, where you're scrolling along and all of a sudden there's a bunch of negative stuff in there or things that control your, kind of tap into the fear we already have and things like that. So minimizing those kinds of things, being very proactive about what you want to be thinking about. So when you start your day, I like to have a morning routine. World-class athletes, world-class surgeons, world-class attorneys, people who are going to trial law, who need to get up in front of a jury, they practice and they get very clear and they rehearse. What is it I'm going to be doing? Well, you should do that for every day in your morning. Plan your day, get really clear. What can you control that you're currently not able to control is what it comes down to. And you just have to minimize the negative things that come at us and maximize all the positive things. And so practical steps would be, again, morning ritual. What do you want to pay attention to? What do you want to avoid that'll keep you from doing that? You brought up anxiety. See, anxiety and fear are looking into the future. So all things that are in the future are where our emotions get out of control because we can't control those things. Guilt and other things are from the past. Fear, anxiety are looking into the future. So being in the moment as much as you can. It's like, I'm worried, let's say, about my business. I'm worried about clientele. I'm worried about what have you, but right now in my life, in the now, not in the future, in the past, right? I've got some decisions to make and I've got some things that I can control. So trying to keep it just, this is going to sound crazy, but from a clinical, psychological, mental toughness standpoint, deep breathing, really, really powerful. Taking the time to slow down, take in deep breaths, because literally, if you take a deep breath, when you're in fight or flight, you've got adrenaline and cortisol coursing through your system. Those things are really bad for you. They keep you from sleeping. They cause you to gain weight. There's all kinds of problems with a lot of adrenaline and cortisol coursing through your system. Taking a deep breath physiologically, literally shuts off adrenaline and cortisol. So if you take 2 or 3 deep breaths in a row, it's really good for you. It's a reset. It shuts it off just like turning the light off. So deep breathing, really powerful. In fact, there's a world-class golfer on the PGA Tour named Rory McIlroy. And yeah, you've heard of Rory.
Yeah.
And he lately has said that deep breathing is his number one thing that he does. In 2011, he was leading the Masters golf tournament on Saturday night by, I think, 8 shots. And the next day, he blew up. He choked.
Oh.
He couldn't handle the pressure. He wasn't mentally tough enough. And he lost by 4 shots. From an 8-shot lead to a 4-shot loss.
Wow.
So in June of 2011, he's in the US Open. And he's again, by the 3rd day on Saturday, he's leading. And I think his lead was 6 shots. I mean, this guy's right. This is a serious lead.
Yeah.
Okay. And the next day, he ends up winning by 8 shots. So a couple months later, after having a colossal choke, he actually really overcame himself, had the mental toughness. It's like if he didn't have that bad experience, would he have been able to handle it? But he had that really rough experience where he couldn't handle the pressure. He wasn't mentally tough enough. And then he went ahead and overcame in a big way just a few months later. And he was asked in the press tent, what was the difference? And he said 2 things, focus. No, he said 2 things. He said process and spot. And they were like, what are you talking about? And he said process was that I had a goal that no matter what was happening, I had a very clear process for what I was going to do to hit a golf shot properly and correctly and to be at my maximum best to control the focus. So he had a process in place in order to control his mind and emotions. And then on the spot was when he was on the green, it was basically the same thing. It's just another process for how he was going to keep his mental toughness and focus and concentrate. So, having clear things to focus on that are empowering and that you can influence is really the issue. And you've got to control the environment and determine what you want to think about. That's what it really comes down to, is choosing, like I said earlier, what to think about.
Jay, that is, honestly, guys, all that is, in a time like this is not just a watch once type of video. This is a watch multiple times. This is the kind of information that people need right now. And thank you so much for providing this, some insight into the human mind, some practical steps that people can take. And if people want to learn more about you and your coaching and the hiring work that you do, where can they find you?
realtalenthiring.com, or you could go to jayhenderson.org. And you can find me in both of those places.
Fantastic.
Let me add one more thing, Charlie.
Sure, please.
It's really important, okay? Your energy, your levels of energy, okay? So there's a great study that was done about energy and attitude. Those are 2 massive keys. So if you're eating a lot of junk food, if you're not sleeping well, if you're staying up too late, if you're binge watching movies in the middle of the night, it's going to really affect your performance, right? So basically, if you can keep your energy at its maximum highest, and you can have the most, now this is going to sound glib, but it's not, it's actual science. If you can keep your attitude as optimistic and positive as possible, they've got studies that show that if you have low energy or a negative attitude, you can't go into the flow state. And people talk about the flow state where there's high performance, right? Well, it's like you have a 500% greater capacity to learn and to make better decisions as an executive, even if you're sitting and you're not involved in a sport, if you're in flow. And you can't get into flow if you have negative energy, low energy, or a negative attitude. And it's interesting because most people want to get, if we hear about flow, anybody that's into that kind of thing, most people want to get into flow in order to feel good. But what the research shows, and I've been studying this for 25 years, is that feeling good helps you get into flow.
That's really cool.
Rather than waiting for it to happen, you can try to make it happen, but through the things we've been talking about. So
That's
I'd throw that in there.
Thank you for adding that. I mean, right now, people finding those moments of flow, which actually I feel like I'm finding fairly often these days because of, hey, how do we help the community right now? And when you're so focused on that flow state can be achieved. So Jay, thank you so much for this information. Really appreciate it, buddy.
Thank you.